We'll be live and ready to go. Good morning and welcome. Why don't we get started, and I'd like to invite everyone to grab a seat. Hopefully you have some coffee. We call that the 8th sacrament in the Episcopal Church. That's right. And once it gets going through you, it really turns on the grace. Well, we have a wonderful, wonderful guest with us today, and that is Lynne Twist, who is a dear friend of Dr. Tom and Adriana Riles. I want to thank the Riles for helping to arrange for Lynne to come be with us. Please join me in thanking Dr. Tom Riles and Adriana Riles. You're the best. You have wonderful taste in friends. Now, Lynne is a recognized global visionary who's dedicated more than 40 years of her life to helping to alleviate poverty, to end hunger, and to work at and address issues of social justice and environmental sustainability. Along with her husband Bill, in 1996, they started the Pachamama Alliance, which is dedicated to helping indigenous people in Ecuador in a region of the Amazon, extremely remote. And she hopefully will be able to share a little bit of that story with us today. And we'll be doing a podcast right afterwards, and we'll make sure you get that if you receive our e-news each week. That will go out to you and give you more opportunity to learn from her. She has had incredible experiences working with people like Mother Teresa of Calcutta, and being interviewed by Oprah Winfrey and being on NPR, but traveling to some of the most remote parts of the globe and being with people who have almost nothing in terms of material wealth, while also working with some of the wealthiest families in America and around the world to support people in need. For a while, she was the chief fundraiser for World Hunger, a group that we support here at Christ Church, and was in charge of all the fundraising in 53 different countries. Doing this all while raising 3 children and supporting her husband, who had a very large job in the business world. So we're really thrilled to have you with us, Lynne.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for welcoming me.
Lynne has authored several books, and the most recent is entitled The Keys to Living a Completed Life. And I'm going to order that right away and look forward to reading that. I've just been reading The Soul of Money, Transforming Your Relationship with Money and Life. Just to give you a little plug for this, it's the first book that I will order 50 copies of and give to leaders in our parish. It's that significant. We live in one of the most affluent communities in the world, and we're blessed. But so often we, like so many, think we could have more. And that is a tape that can go through all of our brains constantly and can keep us, in a way, imprisoned by just needing a little bit more. In fact, John D. Rockefeller once said, when asked, how much money is enough? He said, just a little bit more than I have. So today is a chance for us to explore our relationship with money from someone who has dedicated so many years to helping people be free of being imprisoned by their relationship with money and using it as a great opportunity to bless others. So Lynne, here's the first question. What's your first memory of money and what you learned from that lesson?
Oh my goodness. I didn't know you were going to ask me that one. Well, I remember I was raised in outside of Chicago in a place called Evanston, Illinois. And I had 2 older sisters. And, you know, when things come in threes, it's easy to leave the little one out. You know, that experience of being the littlest of 3. And I remember when my 2 older sisters, Holly and Wendy, went to school, and I didn't because I was still too little to go to school. And they got allowances, and I didn't get an allowance. It was very annoying. And I remember thinking that wasn't fair because I could do chores, and I could wash the dishes, and I could vacuum, and I could sweep the front steps, and but I didn't get any money for that, and I was kind of mad about that. And so I remember when I went to kindergarten in Lincoln School, there was my sister, my oldest sister, who's very dramatic. Her name is Holly. She was the star of the school play. And she was going to be a princess in a very complicated and very important, at least it seemed to me, I was the little sister, very important production. And one day she came home from school and she was in sobs of tears and ran into my mother's room, sobbing in my mother's lap, closed the door really hard so her little pesky sister, me, wouldn't hear what was wrong. And I listened through the keyhole, and I found out that she was so upset because the school was in a budget crisis, and there would be no costumes and sets for the school play because they couldn't afford it. And I thought, oh, my sister, she was dreaming of, this huge production. So I went back to my kindergarten, and I talked to Miss Edda, the teacher, and we decided to do a fundraising event. I was 5 years old. So we organized, Miss Edna was my ally, and so we organized the kids to make lemonade and chocolate chip cookies, and we set up lemonade and chocolate chip cookie stands all the way around the school every weekend until there was enough money to pay for costumes and sets for the sixth grade play. That was my first fundraising event.
So then you went on to raise hundreds of millions of dollars,
Right.
and are we surprised? So I once interviewed a incredible, successful businessman named Bronson Ingram. This was back when I was a newspaper reporter. Bronson ran the largest barge company in the world, and his family was involved in a big publishing industry. And I asked him about philanthropy, and he said to me, Merrick, no one is ever born generous. They have to be taught by someone. My parents taught me how to be generous. So what are some of the key lessons, just briefly, because we've got a lot of territory to cover, that you've tried to instill in your children and that your parents instilled in you in terms of money and our relationship with it?
Well, first of all, I don't know that I agree with this thing about people not being born generous. I think they are. And I think it gets blocked or suppressed by a culture of everybody thinking they need more than they have all the time. So they can't be generous if they don't have enough. And the mindset of scarcity, which is a cultural mindset, I believe, believing that there's not enough to go around and someone's going to be left out all the time, kind of pushes us to always, always, always think we've got to have more, no matter where we are on the big spectrum. So I actually think generosity is natural, but it's blocked by the culture we live in more than encouraged. But with our kids, when they were, I can't remember exactly when we started this, but we created a tradition where at Thanksgiving, we would give them, depending on how old they are, some money to give away between Thanksgiving and Christmas to at least three organizations that they would give to and also volunteer. And, if it was $500 or if it was $50, whatever it was, their task was to identify three organizations or charities or things they believed in to give money to. And then on Christmas Eve, they would share why they gave money to the animal shelter and what it was like to volunteer there, why they gave money to the homeless person, and what it was like to talk to that person, why they gave money to the church. And so that became something that we did at Thanksgiving to give them the money, and then something they shared at Christmas about how they used it. So it was like a little training program for the philanthropy. And then we also had this thing we were doing with our grandkids. I was talking to Tom and Adriana, and it kind of works. When we give them an allowance, when they stay with us, we give them chores. And then we have 3 jars. There's the spend jar, there's the save jar, and then there's the contribute jar. So if we give them, like a $3, they put $1 in each one of the jars, just so that they know there's 3 different ways to look at money from when they're little. So those kinds of things, even though they don't always put all the money evenly, I have to say. Sometimes it all goes in the spend jar. But at least the distinction starts to live in their little heart as well as their brain.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous. You mentioned that we often eclipse our soul or dismiss it, compromise it in our relationship with money, the way we get money, use money, give money, or sometimes just try to avoid thinking about money. You mentioned that aggressive consumerism in our society is at odds with deeply held values, what you describe as our soul. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, people often ask me why I call this book, and also I have a little institute called The Soul of Money. They ask me, well, do you think money has a soul? And actually, I don't think money has a soul, but I know that we do. And we can use money in a way that is soulful, that is connected to the heart and soul of who we are. Money actually is a current. That's why it's called a currency. And I loved the sermon today because I like to see money and consider money like water. It doesn't belong to any of us, really. It belongs to all of us or none of us. It's designed to flow, to move around. And a fundraiser or a conscious philanthropist constantly is looking how to move money towards the highest good. And so I love the metaphor of water for money, because when you think of water, when it's flowing, it can cleanse, it can purify, it can make things grow. It has a beautiful energy to it that you can give to water. Water's neutral, but you can give it that energy. Or it can flow in a way that toxifies, makes people sick. It can carry disease. It depends on how we use it. And when money is hoarded, just like water, when it's hoarded in greed, just like water when it's held, it can become stagnant and toxic, like water, to those who are holding it, and suddenly you kind of can't see how to make it flow. You just want to hold on to it. So I loved looking at money as a current and a currency that's designed really, originally, in the history of money, if you know anything about that. When it was invented in a society, when it became a society-wide phenomenon, to make sure that everyone everywhere had what they needed and wanted. That was the purpose of money, until we invented all kinds of inventions through banking and interest that had us suddenly using money to make money, which is now, kind of the primary way people achieve wealth. But originally, it was designed to just keep flowing, just keep moving. So it's interesting to think about if we're more soulful in our relationship with money, if we give it the imprimatur of our soul as we receive it and as we move it into the world, it feels a little bit more healthy. Healthy for us, healthy for the way we earn it, healthy for the way we use it. And that's really what the book is about, and really what my work is about. Not that it's bad to accumulate it. No, we want to do that. We want to make sure we're well taken care of. But sometimes we go a little overboard with that in terms of way more than we need. And the world is so eager for financial resources to move towards the highest good. And we all have the capacity to make that happen.
Well, I love your image about water, and picking up on Cheryl's brilliant sermon today. Mm-hmm. A group of 22 of us will be in the Holy Land this week, and one of the things we'll see on our first day is we'll be going to see the Mount of the Transfiguration in Mount Tabor, and then going to Magdala, where Mary Magdalene was from, and that overlooks the Sea of Galilee. And the Jordan River flows into the Sea of Galilee from the north, and it flows out through the south. And it's a thriving ecosystem. And it then ends in the Dead Sea, and water flows in, but nothing flows out. And everything's captive, and nothing lives in it. So it kind of is that image of if money flows into our life but never flows out, it actually has a way of killing the whole ecosystem of who we are and around us.
Yeah, it's deadening, actually,
Right.
just like it is in the Dead Sea.
So I have a dear friend who was the rector of Trinity Church Wall Street, the second wealthiest church in the world. And he used to give stewardship talks, and he said that when you talk about stewardship in the church, everyone thinks it's the rector's squeeze play on their wallet. And so they get defensive and like, I'm going to hold this back. I don't really want to hear this message. But you maintain that there's a whole spirituality that's unleashed through our use of money and how we see it. Mm-hmm. How will we get started on that journey? You talk about people like David Stendhal Rest, Brother David Stendhal Rest, who had a big impact on you and your thinking. Where would we begin the journey?
Where what?
Where will we begin the journey to stop thinking of money as something separate from our spirituality and start to engage in that in a way that it becomes actually part of our spiritual practices?
How do we do that? Well, by having these kinds of conversations, I think. Because, you know, we live in a very, I mean, this is not news to anybody here, commercial, consumer-oriented society. Everything is about purchasing and consuming. When you think about, you know, we used to call ourselves and everybody else citizens. And you think about that word, it means he or she who's responsible for the well-being of the community, the well-being of the state, the well-being of the country, the well-being of the world. It refers to standing for something. We've devolved, actually, to consumers. We don't call ourselves citizens so much anymore. We're called and treated as consumers. And the word consumer means he or she who takes, depletes, diminishes, or destroys. And when you think about how powerful labels are, we're called consumers, we're treated like consumers, even our political leaders look at us as consumers now. They watch your consumer pattern to decide how to talk to you. So we're not treated as citizens any longer, which is who we really are, people who want the world to work. So to actually start rethinking who we are is part of our relationship with money, I think. I mean, you know, money's become such an important part of life that we've actually, in many ways, in our culture, I'll say, not people, these good people here in this beautiful church, but in our culture, we've actually exalted money. We've made it more important than human life in the way we culturally live. We've given it more power than the natural world. In our culture, we've assigned it so much power. You know, when I say we've made it more important than life, you know, we will do all kinds of things for money that are inconsistent with our humanity. Even good people won't speak to a former husband or wife after a divorce where the money issue got really gnarly and you can't talk to this person anymore that you loved, that you raised children with. You know, that our society is filled with people like that. And maybe some of us have fallen into that trap here. Or when an inheritance comes to one brother and not to one sister, they can't talk to each other anymore. That says that money's more important than that relationship, which we all know isn't really true. But there's a lot of cultural baggage around money that has us make money more important than relationships sometimes. We've made money more important than the natural world. We will destroy a rainforest for money. We will destroy the very water source on which we depend for money. And it's unfortunately still kind of legitimate because if the financial gains are great enough, then you can kind of look the other way. I'm talking about culturally now. Even though that's becoming more and more illegitimate, it's still in the way we live. And we've made money more important than God in some ways. When I was growing up in Evanston, Illinois, everybody went to church. 50 million people were in church on Sunday mornings in America. Now, 50 million people, they're in shopping centers on Sunday morning. I remember stores were closed on Sunday. You couldn't shop on Sunday. In Evanston, Illinois, the only thing that was open was the drugstore for emergencies. Not even grocery stores were open. Now, not only is everything open, but that's where people go on Sunday mornings. There's 50 million people right now in shopping centers. That's kind of the new church of our time, unfortunately, instead of a beautiful place like here. So I guess what I'm saying is the culture we live in has exalted money to be almost the God we worship. And to say that it's become kind of soulless is almost like an understatement. We assign money its power. It has no power except the power we give it. Now, obviously, there's these financial powers, but really it's what we say. And if we say money's more important than human life, then so be it. But if we actually start to realize that money is in the background, it's a tool to use to enhance and empower us to be more Christian, to be more loving, to be more connected with each other, to make this world a better place, then that's a different way of living with money, and that's not what the culture teaches. You have to really, just think about your kids and your grandkids, what they learn on social media, how the algorithms are manipulating them, and all of us. So there's a lot of work to do to put money in its place, which is a very useful tool. My God, I love it myself. I love asking for money. You know, most people don't like to fundraise. I love asking for money.
And we're going to talk about
I have to restrain myself from not asking you right now.
If you think I like asking about money, let me tell you, I'm dwarfed. Much of what you discuss is centered around concepts of scarcity and sufficiency, and how those concepts drive our view of money and how we choose to use it. I'd like to go a little deeper with you and to see if you can flesh that out for us. First of all, scarcity. You describe three big myths of scarcity. Not enough, more is better, and well, that's just the way it is. You're right, we spend most of our hours and days of our lives hearing, explaining, complaining, or worrying about what we don't have enough of. We don't have enough time, rest, exercise, work, profits, power, wilderness time, weekends, money. So I guess in some ways we all want to have more. The leaders in Christ Church and I want to have more parishioners and more financial support to have our ministries go from good to great. What is wrong with wanting to have more? What is the pitfall?
Well, what I describe in the book and what how I want to answer that is to say that there is an unconscious, unexamined mindset. It's a way of seeing the world that has become almost like a lens that we have in our culture. An unconscious, unexamined mindset is a mindset you don't know you have. In other words, so it's before discernment, before thinking, before opinion. It's like having when you have sunglasses on and then you forget you have them on and then you take them off and oh my God, everything's so bright. So it's like a lens through which I think we've been almost brainwashed to see the world. And that lens is an unconscious, unexamined mindset of scarcity. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't places and people who don't have enough. There are. I've worked very intimately on hunger. So I've been in refugee camps. I've seen war firsthand with my own eyes. I know there's places where people don't have water, don't have food, don't have opportunity. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an unconscious, unexamined mindset that is the cultural set that we live in that brainwashes us to think there's not enough. There's not enough to go around and someone somewhere is always going to be left out. And it's not something we think, it's something we think from. There's not enough to go around. There's someone somewhere who's always going to be left out. I need to make sure it's not me and mine, whoever I consider me and mine to be. And that immediately creates an us and a them that isn't valid, really. If you're in the us category, which everybody here is, and I am too, you have to make sure that you and yours are well taken care of so that you're not among those that are left out. And you will help those who are left out as soon as you're sure you have way more than you need for you and yours. That's the mindset of our culture. And what I'm suggesting is that's a mindset, not necessarily the way it is. So that, kind of brainwashes us to always think we just need a little bit more before we help other people. And when you think about that mindset, it's, I'm saying it's false. I call it one of the lies of scarcity. And that mindset creates the next part of the mindset. I call them the 3 toxic myths in the mindset we live in. The second is more is better. More of anything, more of everything is better. More square feet in our house, more market share, more this, more that. This is the unconscious, unexamined mindset, which creates, huge waste. That 2 amazing industries that are growing like crazy are storage and waste. They're just huge, huge industries now. Storage, I live in San Francisco. We have massive homeless problem in San Francisco. It is just incredibly confronting. But we're not building houses for those people. We're building houses for the stuff, little storage units outside the city that we can't fit in the houses we already have because they're so filled with stuff that we need to have a second little home to take care of the stuff we can't fit in the houses we already have. We're not building houses for the homeless people. We're building houses for the stuff that we have. It's just kind of a sort of a graphic example of a culture that's lost its way. So first toxic myth is there's not enough. There's not enough time. There's not enough money. There's not enough sleep. It's almost like we wake up in the morning, maybe especially today because of spring forward, you wake up and I didn't get enough sleep. You think that thought even before you really know whether that's true or not, because there's a mindset of there's not enough, it's not enough, I'm not enough, we don't have enough, there's not enough, it's not enough, my mindset. Then more is better, more of anything and everything is better. And then the third toxic myth is, that's just the way that it is, you gotta go with it. And that holds the whole mindset in place. So we live in a culture that promotes more of everything, even things you don't need more of, that makes you think you don't have enough all the time, no matter how fortunate you are, and then that's just the way that it is. And maybe not for you, but I'm just talking about most people. And it's very, and I'm calling it a condition that is unhealthy, inaccurate, and actually kind of lie we live with in a consumer culture that promotes scarcity and more as the answer to everything. And so I often say, people say then, well, what's the truth? So.
Well, let's talk about sufficiency then.
Yeah.
When do we know that we have enough? And I love that example about, well, when I get a little more, then I'll start to be generous. My brother told me when I was in college, he said, if you want to dedicate your life to serving others, you better start now. Because if you think, you're going to go off having a career and then eventually one day you'll do that, you'll never get to it. That really kind of woke me up. So how do, we know we have enough and get on with this important work? You have an interesting passage about sufficiency. You say perhaps, you wrote, when we live in the context of sufficiency, we find a natural freedom and integrity. We engage in a life from a sense of our one wholeness, rather than desperate longing to be complete. We feel naturally called to share the resources that flow through our lives, our time, our money, our wisdom, our energy, at whatever level of those resources flow to serve our highest commitments in the context of sufficiency. And I believe the Dalai Lama defined happiness as being content with what you already have. How do we get to sufficiency and what is it?
Well, I make a distinction between sufficiency and abundance. Sufficiency in a consumer culture is very hard to find because the consumer culture is always telling you. So we race right past enough and we don't even know it happened, because we're headed towards more. So sufficiency, I call the radical, surprising truth about life. And when we're in touch with who we really are. You know, when you're with your grandkids, I mean, I see the children that came into communion, when you're with your little ones, when you're present with the sunrise, when you're out on the water in your wonderful sailboat, there's these moments where the experience of being complete and whole and not just blessed, but in communion with the absolute perfection of life, that's the experience of sufficiency. And it's not about an amount of anything. It doesn't have anything to do with an amount. So we think of enough as halfway between not enough and more than we need, when in fact it's available in this moment that we are enough, we have enough, and we can be an expression of that. And abundance in a mindset of scarcity turns out to be excess. That's what's in our landfills. That's what's in the Goodwill store. That's what you call to make the donations with the things that weigh more stuff than you need in your garage, for example. But that's in the mindset of scarcity. In the mindset of sufficiency, abundance is natural because what you appreciate appreciates, if I can put it that way. What you appreciate appreciates. I have a principle that I think I maybe invented it or discovered it, I don't know, but just listen to this. I call it the principle of sufficiency. If you let go of trying to get more of what you don't really need, which is what we're kind of brainwashed to want more of, it frees up oceans of energy that's all tied up in the chase to turn and pay attention to what you already have. When you pay attention to what you already have, when you nourish what you already have, and when you share what you already have, it expands. So let me say that again. When you let go of trying to get more of what you don't really need, which is what we're brainwashed to want more of, it frees up oceans of energy to turn and pay attention to what you have. When you pay attention to what you have, when you make a difference with what you have, when you share what you have, it expands in the nourishment of your attention and your generosity. And those of you who just came back from Tanzania, and those of you who went to Cuba, and all the good work that's been done in this church, I know is a source of enormous prosperity for you. Prosperity, the word wealth, I think, it's important to sort of unpack it, because wealth etymologically comes from well-being. That's what the word wealth comes from, well-being. And that's what we want. And when you think about the etymology of well-being, it comes from the well of being, which is really infinite in all of our lives. So true wealth is the prosperity that comes from the profound experience of being enough, knowing you are enough, experiencing that you are so grateful for having enough. You're in this experience of gratefulness, which is the great fullness of life. That's really what gratefulness is, the great fullness of life, being in touch with the great fullness of life, no matter where you are in the, let's call the economic spectrum. So that's this distinction I call sufficiency, which I learned from the great Buckminster Fuller, who was one of my greatest teachers. And Bucky talked a lot about sufficiency being the radical, surprising truth about life at any moment, in any life, in any country, at any time. And that's available to us every moment of every life, any moment of life. And once we appreciate the bounty and blessings of our life, no matter what that is, it appreciates in the nourishment of our appreciation.
Now, you're a wonderful storyteller. In your book, you capture some just moments where we're right there with you. One of the most moving ones I found is when you had a chance to meet Mother Teresa of Calcutta for the first time, who was this incredible inspirational figure that you looked to or were inspired by, and then you had a chance to have a personal encounter, and that personal encounter was sabotaged in a way that was so shocking and then was revealing in a teachable moment. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I usually cry here, so if you cry too, it's very helpful. Well, I was raised as a Catholic, and I was quite religious as a child. And my father died when I was 14 of a heart attack in a very shocking way, and I thought it was my fault, like children do when they lose a parent. And so I got really, really religious after he died. I was a popular high school kid, but I had a secret religious life. And I just adored Mother Teresa. I thought she, hung the moon and walked on water and glowed in the dark. And I didn't really think much of the church at that time because there were all these rules that I didn't like. But I thought she was the real deal. And I remember thinking maybe I should become a nun when I was in high school. And also because I see people who are kind of in my age group. I saw this movie, The Nun Story, and Audrey Hepburn looked so beautiful in the nun's outfit. And I thought I would look so good. I would look like her if I had a nun's outfit on. So I was thinking I would be a nun. It was kind of my secret wish. But then, it didn't go that way. I got married, had kids, started working on hunger and for the Hunger Project, and I found myself later in India. If you work on hunger, you end up in India. And one day when I was working I think I was in Bombay or Mumbai now, I shared with a friend, her name was Indira Koitra, how much I adored Mother Teresa as a child. And she said, "Oh, I know Mother Teresa. I'll introduce you." And I thought, "Oh, you know Mother Teresa? You'll actually introduce me?" She said, "Yeah, next time you come, you tell me and I'll set up a meeting with her." And I thought, oh my God. And then, months went by, years went by, and, it was like just that moment of slim possibility. And then I was in Delhi one time and I called her and called my friend Indira, and she said, "Oh, Mother Teresa just came into town. I told her you're here. She'd love to meet you tonight." And I thought, oh my God. I hadn't been to church in like 10 years. I was totally freaked out. I canceled all my meetings for the day. I practically bathed myself in holy water. I went to church. I did everything I could to make up for all the lost time. And then I got in a car and I went to Old Delhi to her orphanage for little girls under age 2. So I get to this square, and I'm so, by the way, I was just shaking. It was such a big deal for me to meet her. It would be for probably anybody, but for me it was like, oh my God, I can't even believe I'm going to meet Mother Teresa. So I get to this square, and I'm across the cobblestone square to the doorway, modest doorway with a picture of Mother Teresa over the door, Missionaries of Charity, and there's 2 stone steps going up to the door. And I'm a trash picker-upper wherever I go. That's a kind of fetish of mine. And in India, I'll tell you, it's a big job. So there was, on the steps going up to the door, there was a big crumpled piece of newspaper, and I picked it up, and inside there was a baby. The smallest human being I have ever seen in my life. It was a little girl. She was, I may be exaggerating, but she wasn't a lot bigger than my own hand. And she was alive, her heart was beating, she was breathing, but she was, tiny, tiny little human being. So I wrapped her in my shawl and knocked on the door, and a nun came, and I handed this little charge. I told him this little one was on the doorstep, and they took her, and I came in, and there was there was a cement floor that had been painted blue. There were lights hung on wires, just a light bulb to light the room. There were 39 iron cribs with little girls, little baby girls under 2 and under, all babies. Babies, 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 babies. There were so many babies. And then there were some gymnastic mats, kind of like, with more babies, little babies. All girls, 1 boy. there were 39, 40, 50 babies, I would say, and I do not remember anybody crying. Now, I know that is impossible, but I don't remember anybody crying. I like Googling, yes, but, and there were nuns taking care of these babies, and the nun that greeted me said, "I'm so sorry, Mother Teresa is not here. She's at the local jail bailing out the local prostitutes because we need help with the kids. And we are going to, take them in and train them how to take care of children with us because we need more help. And we don't know when she'll be back, so could you just help us for the next few hours?" And I said, "Sure." They put an apron on me, and I went over to I was directed to this row of sinks, and we were bathing the children. And most of the children were deformed. They were missing fingers, or they were blind, or they didn't missing a toe, or they were crippled. Little babies that were discarded, almost all, as I said, girls. And the nuns and the lay people were at the sinks. One was washing their hair, and then they handed to me to rinse the babies and towel them off. And everybody was singing. It was so wonderful. And it was like, this is my meeting with Mother Teresa. If she never comes back, I'm in heaven. So beautiful. And she always said, "I am my work. To know me is to know my work." So I thought, well, this is my meeting with Mother Teresa, and I'm totally fulfilled. And right when I had that thought, someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, "She's here. She's ready to see you." And then, of course, I freaked out again. And so they guided me down to a dark hallway. And there was a wooden table and 2 chairs, one on either side, on one side of the hallway. And I was asked to sit in one of the little wooden chairs. And then I looked down the long hallway, and preceding Mother Teresa was her Labrador Retriever. She had an old, wonderful dog, little gray beard, little black Labrador that she adored. He was crippled, and he was walking ahead of her. And I immediately knew she was coming because of the dog. And then I saw her, and I, kind of burst out of my chair and ran and kneeled in front of her. And I can't remember what I kissed her, hands, her feet, her everything. And when I was on my knees, she was about my size. She was very small. And, she patted me on the head, and she said, "Get up, get up, get up." Took my hands, and we went over to the 2 chairs and the little wooden table, and sat down, and she took my hands, and, there she was, Mother Teresa right there, me right here. I was just like, my tears streamed down my face. And I can't even remember what we talked about. She wasn't a woman of many words, but just being with her was so moving. And I had an experience that I'll say of profound unconditional love that was so deep, so fulfilling, is an understatement, kind of a nirvana bliss experience, that I was just in heaven. And at a certain point, I heard loud noises behind me down the other end of the hall. Loud noises, angry voices, loud, boisterous people coming towards us. And there was a very strong aroma of someone who was way over-perfumed, if you know what I mean. If you've been in a taxi cab in New York where they have those horrible, smelly things in the taxi. It was like that. And then these huge people showed up, a couple, an Indian couple, a Sikh man and a Sikh woman. And the man, and they were angry, just to be really honest, to me they were ugly, rude, entitled bullies. And the man was huge, and he had a turban and a big giant topaz right in the middle of his turban. And I remember he had rings on every single finger, including his thumb. I'll never forget this guy. And he was portly, and he was about as wide as he was tall, and he was very tall. And he was, very kind of well, he was obnoxious. He was overweight, over the top, overbearing, over. And then his wife was the same. She was very large, very expensive, very elegant, but, kind of overdone, sorry. And then she had, I remember, a diamond in her nose and diamonds that went to her ear, big ones. It was garish. And then lots of over-made up, lots of makeup, lots of jewelry. And she was very large and very tall. And they burst into our meeting, my meeting with Mother Teresa, and they said, "Mother, we didn't get the picture. We didn't get the picture, the photo." And they handed me an little Instamatic camera, if you remember those. And they didn't say hello or anything like that. And they pulled Mother Teresa up from her chair, and I'm not kidding, by the elbow. "You stand over here, Mother." And they handed me the camera. "Take the picture." The woman did. And so there's Mother Teresa in between these two huge people, like bookends, and she's this little tiny person all bent over from osteoporosis. And I'm across the hall, "Take the picture." And then this woman did what I thought was just inexcusable. And she said, "Mother, put your chin up." And here's Mother Teresa's osteoporosis. And she took her hand under Mother Teresa's chin like this, and she went, "Ah!" And she held it up like this, and she said, "Take the picture, take the picture. Mother, keep your chin up." And she held her chin up like this. And I took the picture, and I was so angry with these people. Then they left. They grabbed the camera and they left. They didn't thank me. They didn't thank her. They didn't say goodbye. They were just rude and ugly and terrible. And I hated them. I mean, honest to God, I hated them. And then we sat down, and Mother Teresa was totally fine. I was not. My blood was boiling. She took my hands again as if, this had not even happened. And then I tried to calm myself down. We completed our meeting. She gave me a scapular medal. She'd pray for my mom and my son, who was sick at the time. And then she walked me to the door, said goodbye to all the babies and the nuns. And I got in my car was waiting. And it was about a 45-minute or hour trip back to my hotel in New Delhi. And during the ride, I realized, oh my God, I was in the presence of a living saint, and I experienced the most profound love I've ever had in my life, and the most profound hate I can remember ever having in my life. So I wrote to her when I got back to my hotel, and she was fine with those people. I was not. And I wrote to her and thanked her for the teaching. And she wrote me back, and she said, "Christ lives in every face. You can learn to see Christ in every face." And she saw Christ in those people, and I couldn't see that. And she said, "You're naturally drawn to the underserved, those who are in need. That's your work, I know, but you need to widen your circle of compassion to the wealthy, to the entitled, to the overbearing, to the domineering, because they need your love just as much." She said, "The vicious cycle of wealth," this was her phrase, "can be as challenging and have as much suffering as the vicious cycle of poverty. And you need to expand your circle of compassion to include them. Your love will heal them." And boy, was that an important message for me. And ever since then, it changed my life completely. And if I could find that wonderful couple, I would bow to their, thank you, for the teaching that they gave me. I now know that they too were Christ. So it's a long answer to your question.
What a story, but that was one of the incredibly powerful. So I just want to ask about three things, and then a final question to do with our congregation. Bill's career was taking off in the 70s. His partners and he were making a great deal of money. Life was changing. He was going on business trips all the time, working increasingly longer and longer hours, and you're trying to be as supportive as you can. And you're also keeping up with the Joneses, that if your friends went on a really lovely vacation, you thought, we should be taking a lovely vacation and not just, doing something modest. If your friends filled their house with art, you thought, our house would look nice with art. And if friends got a summer home, you thought, we'll get a summer home. And at some point, you stepped away from that kind of train that just kept on going further and further. What was it that turned you away from that and into the focus on the Hunger Project?
Well, I have to acknowledge Buckminster Fuller. He lived a life as an experiment. Could one human being make a difference that would impact all of humanity? And he had a commitment to create a world that works for everyone with no one and nothing left out. And when you think about that, to create a world that works for everyone with no one and nothing left out, and could one little individual live a life that would impact all of humanity in a positive way. And I was so inspired by Bucky Fuller. So that was had a huge impact on me. And then I introduced him to Werner Erhard, who was an old program that maybe some of you remember called EST, which was highly controversial. But I had taken EST, and it really hit me over the head like a 2x4. It was a big awakening for me, that program, about transforming your life so that you could really make a difference. So those two things kind of came together for me, and I introduced Werner Erhard to Buckminster Fuller, and out of that union, the Hunger Project was born, the commitment to end world hunger, and that I ended up devoting my life to that. And it gave me a life I never could imagine. And I've realized that, the book that I just finished is called Living a Committed Life, Finding Freedom and Fulfillment in a Purpose Larger Than Yourself. The real fulfillment for me, and I'm not saying this has to be for everyone, but is living a life, a committed life, making a commitment that's larger than something you can ever take credit for, that nobody knows really you had anything to do with maybe, but larger than your own life starring you. Turning your life over to something really life-altering. And I did that with the Hunger Project. And then so did Bill, so did my children. We ended up living what I call a committed life. And we have friends all over the world. My kids each speak 4 languages. They're welcome in Tanzania, in Guinea-Bissau, in India, in Ecuador, because we lived in the context of ending world hunger and now working to preserve the natural world. So I guess what I'm saying is that Bucky and Werner really opened that possibility for me, and the EST training, and then the Hunger Project. I would say it's really the Hunger Project that gave me a mission so much bigger. It's not something you can check off and say you did. It's something you can contribute to with all your heart. And that really gave me this concept of a purpose larger than your own life, that fulfills your life in ways that you can't do on your own. It's like the commitment comes back and turns you into someone you need to be to fulfill it, rather than you're the person you need to be to fulfill the commitment and then you make it. No, you make the commitment, and then that commitment comes back and shapes you into who you need to be to fulfill that commitment. So that's been a real gift to me, and I think it began then. But I'll also just acknowledge when my father died, and I realized that I wanted to be someone he would be proud of, that was another seed sometimes a tragedy gives you access to wanting to fulfill your life in a different way. So I think there's all kinds of touch points in life that teach you how to be the best human being you can be.
And we could dedicate this entire time to this next question, but we can't leave without talking about this. In 1996, Bill and you set up the Pachamama Foundation, and it's transformed lots of lives, and it's an effort to also preserve the well-being of our entire planet. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into that and what you're doing with it?
How much time do we have? I'm watching the clock here. Well, I was completely dedicated to ending world hunger. I was going to do that for the rest of my life until hunger ended or the end of my life, whichever came first. And never thought I'd do anything else. And our children were involved. It was very much who we were as a family. And then I got invited to help a friend with his organization in Guatemala. And in that encounter, we had a exposure to a shaman, and I'd never been involved in shamanic practice. I didn't even know what it was, really, in 1994. And in a shamanic ceremony that took place in the middle of the night, midnight, in a rural area in Guatemala, I had a very, very powerful vision. And that vision was not, there were no medicines or any of the things that shamans sometimes use to put you in a trance. It was just the shamans singing, his whistling, and his drumming that put us in a kind of a state of receptivity that I received a very strong vision of some indigenous people somewhere. And it turns out it was the Achuar in the Ecuadorian Amazon, who were people who had had almost no contact with the outside world and were calling for contact. Now, it's kind of a mystical story, and I could go into it more deeply, but it was a life-changing experience for me. And so my husband Bill and I and another friend, John Perkins, we took a small group to the Achuar to have first contact, which is a very rare privilege for intact indigenous cultures that haven't had any contact by design with the outside world. So we went to a very remote part of the Amazon rainforest at the base of the Andes, what's now called the Sacred Headwaters region. And we had an encounter with the Achuar people that, once again, another life-changing moment. And we began working with them to empower them to preserve their land, their culture, but also the forest, not only for themselves, but for the future of life. And it turns out we were called to the most biodiverse place on Earth, right on the equator, in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And now that's become the Pachamama Alliance. Pachamama, the word Pachamama means Mother Earth, and it's an alliance between the indigenous people of the sacred headwaters of the Amazon and conscious, committed people like all of you for the sustainability of life itself. And the sacred headwaters of the Amazon is a very, very critical ecosystem, as are all ecosystems, but it is the place from which the whole huge Amazon rainforest and river system begins. And it's pristine and roadless and untouched, and the indigenous people have kept it that way. Much of the Amazon, I'm sure you know, has been destroyed or explored in a way that for oil mining, lumber, all kinds of things that we all need, in a way that it's been decimated, but not this place. And so the indigenous people there, 30 indigenous nations now we work with, not just one, consider themselves the custodians of the future of life, and are fiercely committed to protecting this area and putting it in permanent protected status, which doesn't exist, but needs to. So that's what we're working on. And they also told us when we first had our encounter with them, they said, this is a very famous indigenous quote, "If you're coming to help us, even though we invited you here, we're not interested, you need to go home. But if you're coming here because you know your liberation is bound up with ours, then let's work together. And that's the foundation of the Pachamama Alliance, because not only do we work to help them preserve their territories, their precious rainforests for all of us, but they also told us to go home and change the dream of the modern world, which is sounds like a romantic phrase, but it's hard work. Changing the dream of the modern world is really finding our way out of this, the madness of the consumer culture, commodifying everything in sight, into what we call an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, socially just human presence on this planet. So that's the work of the Pachamama Alliance.
That's great. I want to close with just a simple question. In the 2nd, 3rd century, Christian pilgrims would go out from the city to the remote parts of the Egyptian desert to meet a desert mother or father who's devoted his or her life to prayer. And then when they got to the end of the journey and met this holy person, they would say, just a word. Just a word to guide my life. 2018, when I arrived here, I had the sense that Christ Church is in a lot of individuals in Greenwich just held on to everything like that. Within the first month, the boiler went out in the 1958 wing. The second one was on, they thought was going to go before it. That would have to shut down this building, the whole preschool, the office, and the chapel. And our leadership said, that's what the endowment's for. I said, this is Greenwich, Connecticut. You'd never invade an endowment. There's more wealth here than most all of the United States. Why do we need to go to an endowment and someone else who left that behind? And so a couple of Sundays we just asked if you can help us with this, and the money was raised like that. And people said, the endowment's to be managed carefully, never to be invaded like that. And we started to open the hand up. And the hand's been opening wider and wider with every week and month. What word would you have for us as we aspire to be a compassionate, generous community and allow the good things that have flowed into our life to flow out in the lives of others? Could you give us just kind of a closing thought?
Give money. But I'll say something from Brother David Stendel-Rast, a Benedictine monk who's a great teacher for me. He's 90, I think he's going to be 97. Do you know Brother David? He's incredible. Anyway, he says this beautiful thing. He says, the hand that gives has this posture, and the hand that receives has the same posture. It's when the fingers start to curl and grasp that we begin the formation of the fist. And that's the source of all violence. Think about that. That's what's happening in, Putin and the Ukraine, Iraq, Iran, everything. You think about that. And he said, if we can keep our hand open and not grasp, the world will work. And I love that image of the hand staying open and not grasping. And when we find yourself grasping, wanting to hold on, tightening, when somebody says they're going to ask you for money, and your body starts to get tight, and you don't want to listen, and you want them to stop, open your heart, open your hand, and listen. It may or may not be for you to let your financial resources to flow in that direction, but open to that opportunity, because these resources, they don't belong to any of us anyway. They're meant to move. I say to fundraisers, when I train fundraisers, I consider it sacred work to ask for money, and I'm not kidding. Because I think what we all need help in is moving money away from investing it in what we fear and reallocating it to what we love. To move money from what we fear to what we love. And what we fear is really the source of our overconsumption, our, huge defense budgets and building weapons and bombs and things that kill and destroy is the biggest expenditure on earth, is dedicated to what we fear, if you look at any of the budgets of the big countries of the world. But what about what we love? We reallocate, really, maybe we need some of that money there, but maybe a lot more of it needs to go to what we love, our communities, our children, our education systems, our healthcare, really making the world work rather than what we fear. So in many ways, that's what fundraising really is for me, helping people reallocate their own financial resources, knowing that it really doesn't belong to any of us anyway. Let's move it to where it can do the most good for the most people. And I learned that from a woman in Harlem many years ago, that money is like water. And I learned it from a woman who had very little, who taught me really about generosity. Often the people who have the least are some of the most generous people on this planet. So there's so many people to learn from. And the other thing I just got to say about Mother Teresa, she was one heck of a fundraiser. Nobody knows that about her. If you asked her for money, if she asked you for money, you did not say no.
Wow. We've learned so much from you. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Tom and Adriana, for making this possible. Thank you all for your attention, and we'll be asking you more questions in the podcast, and I hope you all have a chance to enjoy the podcast in the weeks ahead. God bless you.
Thank you so much. It was a joy being with you today, and love this church. You're very, very fortunate.
And I think Lynne will sign a few books if anyone would like to come up and purchase a book.